All right, welcome everyone to the Dharma Talk with Kenlin. I'm super excited to be here. This is soul education for the awakened woman. That's what I'm calling this, soul education. I love that word. You know, part of my human design and gene keys is the left angle cross of education. And when I saw that, it made so much sense to me that that's what I'm here to do in my particular way. And this, what I'm saying right now, is an excellent segue into gene key 10. So everything is going to be woven together for you in this soul education moment. So today we are in the frequency of a new moon. We had that new moon yesterday. This recording is for Christmas Day, but I'm recording it the day before, but we're still in that frequency of the new moon in Capricorn. So that means that the sun and the moon are in the same sign. So in a new moon, we have the gene keys that are in, the sun is shining on gene key 10, but so is the moon reflecting gene key 10. So it's an awesome moment to dial in the intelligence, the living wisdom of gene key 10. Now, gene key 10 might feel confronting, which gene key doesn't, but like this might feel confronting. This gene key, if you have a birthday from the 20th all the way through the 25th, you will have the life work of gene key 10. And so chances are, with people that I know in gene key 10 life work, you will have danced a dance, most likely in some way with beauty. Like you are either very beautiful and the world recognizes you as such. And so you may have been a model, or you have been with a narcissist, or you are a narcissist, or both. Because this gene key is the shadow of self-obsession, the gift of naturalness, and the Siddhi of being. I might have named these a little differently, but that's fine because we are all having our transmissions of these gene keys, and they are perfect and complete as they are. And this transmission, I use it as a jumping off point for a discussion, a Dharma talk, a talk about a soul education conversation about our spiritual path. So there is no person who has not walked the path of gene key 10. I love saying that. So this doesn't single out anyone who has this birthday as being either an empath or what we call an echo. And I just read about that in the story of Narcissist and Echo. Such a cool myth that I want to share a little bit about, because I think it's really important to talk about narcissism and also its counterpoint. Remember, in the gene keys, we have things called programming partners. So every gene key in a sequence has a programming partner, or every gene key has a programming partner. And this one is 15, and the shadow is dullness. So gene key 10 does not want to be dull at all. So they're searching for an identity, being a someone. But it's also the truth on our spiritual path. And you've heard me say this before, that you can't be no one without becoming someone. That was my incredible brain guy who is passed now, but he was truly a teacher. And I was trying to get to the Siddhi of being. So the Siddhi of being is that awakened state of no thing, that you are not a separate self, that you are one with everything. And we talk about oneness all the time, but oneness really does love separation. I know that's going to sound different than what you maybe have heard, because separation is the problem. Having a separate self is the problem. And here is the paradox of Gene Key 10. Yes, separation is the problem when we think we are a separate self. And at the same time, this is the game that consciousness is playing in our 3D world. Because why? Think about that for a moment. If there's only one thing, what does one thing not be able to do? What's the one thing can't do? What's the one thing that oneness can't do? And that is see itself, because there's no self to see. There's nothing to see. There's no other to see. So what if oneness plays the game, and this is just a parable? Oneness decides, and there's no deciding in oneness, but like, let's play the game and use the terminology that we can understand here, that oneness decides to break itself up into billions and trillions of parts to see itself. Intimacy. Into me, I see. Into me, you see. Into me, see. Right? The allowance of being seen, that's intimacy. Intimacy isn't a sexual act, although it's more penetrative than sometimes sex really is. Intimacy is the penetration of all of my defenses through your gaze, your eyes. And that's what we're doing in sisterhood. That is how we grow. That's how we become more of who we are on this path of enlightenment. We talk about becoming more of who we are, but really it's like shedding all the things we are not to be the shining light of who we are. And ultimately, the Siddhi tells us that is nothing. That is no thing. That is a return to oneness. That is a return to the light, Gene Key 11. So in this Gene Key is the paradox of navel gazing, obsession with the self, and that being the appropriate path to get to know self. How does that even make sense? It just does. That's what the nature of a paradox is. Two seemingly opposing things that actually fit together. And that's the nature of truth. Truth itself is never polarity. Do we get that? Whenever we're in polarity, we are not speaking truth. We're just having an opinion, which is fine. It's just not truth. So whether you like a political party or a political candidate, whatever, it's all good to have a stand, and it's all good to be somewhere in space and time and know that anytime you're dealing with polarity, the equal and opposite is also true. And that is Gene Key 10, like in its fabric, being on one side, self-obsession, narcissism, and on the other side, no identity at all, no thing. Crazy. So we're going to dive in a little bit and talk about so many aspects of this spiritual path and how we can get tripped up. And if you're new to the spiritual path, this is kind of a roadmap for you, which I think is awesome. The Gene Keys uses Gene Key 10 and the Ring of Humanity to lay out a roadmap for you. And Gene Key 10 is the end, almost the end of the roadmap. It's the penultimate of the roadmap, becoming your true self. And then Gene Key 51, so that you can awaken. And then awaken blows up the whole thing. There is no true self. There is no nothing. We're all one thing. But you don't have to worry about that, right? You can just be here where you are. So Gene Key 10 is about the process that when we start to awaken, so what do we awaken from? We awaken from autopilot. We've been conditioned, right? And that's what we call the not self. We are some vestige of the conditioning, the ancestral wounding, the patterns that have been present in our lineage and in our culture, nature and nurture, We are both. So we incarnate. And the question is, do you incarnate with an Enneagram number or not? That's an interesting question. Is it nature or nurture? The Enneagram is a personality typology that has 9 points to it. And really, for me, it's the reflection of the development of personality. And personality is essentially a constructed not self. It's not the who and what we really are. It's the construct that we build the scaffolding to, in other words, to pretend like we're someone. And those patterns are deep, and we're never going to get rid of them as long as we're playing this game in 3D. And so there's, like every shadow, there's a light. So the Enneagram is shining the light on the parts of your personality that, if you follow the breadcrumb trail, will lead to basically the gift frequency in the gene keys, an elevation, a cleanup of your potential. And in the gift frequency, you're still dealing with the self. You're just a cleaned up version of the self that's self-actualized. And then when we get to the Siddhi, we're blowing that whole thing up, and we see through the veil. We pierced the veil, and we see that there is only one thing. Everything is one thing. So sometimes I bring in the Siddhis, SIDDHI, the divine revelation of this frequency. And in the Gene Keys, this is 64 flavors of enlightenment. And 10 represents pure being. So just seating that for a moment, feeling into that part in ourselves that is pure being, that is the untouched awareness moving through this apparent hologram called 3D Earth, the Earth School. You know, it's like I say, we get to bilocate. On one hand, we are in the trenches as this person. I am Kenlin in this story, and I am witnessing Kenlin in this story. And then there's a witness of the witness, right? So just for a moment, presencing that there's more to this picture than meets the eye. And that it's all beautiful, because the eye is intimacy. The eye is into me, I see. The experience of the divine when you look at me with the eyes of God. And then I see you with the eyes of God. That is namaste. That is that greeting. The God in me greets the God in you. It's a recognition of that true self. So when we are waking up from autopilot, and I've said autopilot will kill you, right? Because autopilot has you repeat the conditioned responses of your lineage, of your culture, of your family dynamic. And so you are really just a patterned robot, autopilot. And when you start to wake up and you start to heal yourself, what does that mean? Heal yourself is to shed, to actually look at, do I believe that? Is that correct? Oh my gosh, I am projecting. Oh my gosh, I am angry as fuck. Oh my gosh, I am sad. And to start to go in and face that. And we call that in part the shadow, because it's been hidden. And other things you can face is things about yourself that we're going to talk about in Gene Key 10, which doesn't hold back any punches. So on the spiritual path, when we break off, we start to go on this journey called, why am I here? Who am I? What is this for? What is the meaning of things? And so we see a bunch of shaman and guide and healers. Can anybody relate? This was me in my, let's see, I started to wake up in my early 30s. I was married. Well, I had gotten a divorce actually right around 30. I was married for 10 years, all my decades in my 20s. Then I got a divorce and I started to wake up, and that move to Colorado. You know, I love this in Eat, Pray, Love, where she says every city has a city, like city, CITY, has a word that is the zeitgeist of that place. And I moved from Washington, D.C. to Boulder, Colorado, and the word was self for me. When I looked around, like people didn't, it wasn't an art town, you know, it wasn't a food town. It was a self town. Like, get a self, find a self, up level yourself. We had triathletes there. We had spiritual seekers there. We had like next level practitioners there. I mean, you know, Boulder in the 90s had all of the things that nobody else had. And so I landed there, and how fitting, right? I thought I was going to practice law in a beautiful town. And I found my way from Denver to Boulder, and my world opened up, and I started to collapse, to really get present to the wounding in my heart. This is all Gene Key 10. This is the path of it, because I wanted to know, who am I? There was no there. There was no self there. It was all a construct. It was all like, let me be successful so I can get something. I can get a self, because we are seeking to find ourselves. And if we can't find ourselves, or if we don't know how, we go on the path of constructing a self. And that can be through achievement. You know, in your family, what has never been done? Or in your family, what's the next level? Oh, my family are doctors, so I'm going to be a doctor. Like, I'm just going to drink the Kool-Aid and be a doctor because that's what everybody else is. Or I'm going to do the opposite. Nobody was a lawyer in my family, so I'm going to be a lawyer. Or everyone told me I should be a lawyer, so I went and studied law, and I don't regret it. It was all awesome. Everything got me here. And, you know, those constructs of who I think I am have to break down. You know, that's why, like in retirement, people, they say, like, you know, men particularly who retire, like, die soon after. Why? They've fucking been working the whole, like, decades and decades for it. Why do they then die? Oh, because they lost their identity. They lost their importance. Their importance was outside of them, reflected back. So as a projector, that was really, I was desperate for being reflected back. And herein, we're going to weave in the tale of narcissist and echo, which is such a great tale, because so many people in the zeitgeist are dealing with this word called narcissism, and people who they believe have it, and the codependency that goes along with that equal and opposite. It's basically a deeply fractured self, both sides. Right? So if you were with a narcissist, or you are a narcissist and you attracted an empath, or we would, let's say, echo, because I think it's codependent, it's beyond empathy and into codependency. It's the equal and opposite fracture. That's what we really get to tell the truth on. And that's part of the shadow material, because it's easy to blame someone for being a certain way without really being responsible for who we were being that attracted that there was just a perfect match in the Chinese puzzle of like, oh, that's perfect. You fit me. Great. And now we can battle it out. And the beauty of that, battling it out, and that's also in the ring of humanity. We must do battle with our shadow. That's Gene Key 38. That's like, you got to be taken to your knees before you go on this spiritual path of like, wait, I'm going to look inward. I'm going to be responsible. I'm going to realize that I have always been sovereign, and I am at choice. That's the deepest healing that gets to happen. So on this path of self-awakening, I'll tell you, like from my 30s, I did everything. That's why I don't do everything now, because I did everything. And not that there's not more, there's like tons more, there's exponential more. But here's the pathway. There's at some point in your life where you want to get readings all the time. Like I saw every single healer, psychic, intuitive, body worker, yoga teacher when I was in the 90s in Boulder, because I was seeking something. I was a true seeker. I wanted to find what I wanted to find. Let's ask this, because remember when you were there, or if you are there listening now, what did I want to find? I wanted to find out who I really am. I wanted to know myself. I don't know that I would have put words to that, but I was in this clear process of shedding, of really what for me, it was like bricks in front of my heart. I was in process of taking those bricks off, and the armor. Oh my God, I had so much armor. I was so defensive because underneath it was like, imagine the most yucky, gory wound that's like abscessed, because it hasn't seen the light of day and nobody's taking care of it. So like I had this like wounded, abscessed heart, so gross, but with armor over it. Like how many of you can relate to that? That shit's real. That's what so many people, like when you are raised in a toxic family, because we're born perfect. And also we carry the sacred wound with us. So it's all perfect. But, you know, we're just like, ga, 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 you know, open. And then we get programmed, and it's nobody's fault. That's just the way it is here. We get programmed. We're not met in the way that our soul really wants to be met. And that's part of the setup, is what I say. It's like, it's all a setup for what? Your sacred wound, to deliver you to your sacred path. So I did everything. And there was a point that it felt like navel gazing, like I'm just obsessed with myself. That's the Gene Key 10 says we can get on the spiritual path and become so obsessed with ourselves. And my mom, you know, she was just like, I'm not into what you're doing because that looks like you're just so self-absorbed. Has anyone been told that by their family? Oh, look, I have somebody who found me. Zoe. Welcome, Zoe. So yeah, and it wasn't the type of narcissism that's wholly defended. It's in fact the opposite. That awakening is cracking up all the armor. It's the opposite of narcissism, although it's self-obsession. And I remember distinctly there being a time on my path where I just said, done. I am not going to any more healers. I'm not getting any more readings. I'm done. And I'm going to start standing on my own 2 feet. I'm strong enough to work the muscles of not collapsing. I know, here's the key. I know how to tend to my own heart. I know how to do it now. That to me is the pivotal moment. When you can take yourself from feeling fucked up, anxious, afraid, angry, whatever, or collapsed, and self-soothe. That is a term in psychology that I learned on this path. And you can self-soothe. Then that's the time when you know you are ready to stand on your own 2 feet. And so you can cut out some of the readings, some of the feedback telling you who you are. I remember, and I've heard other people do this, and I can see it now, where I'll say something about them and they'll quote someone else talking about them. Well, my psychic said that I'm like this. Well, my astrologer said that I'm like this. And so while that for me was hugely important as a reflection, we cannot live there. We have to embody this. We have to embody who we are. Like, so if I have a grand cross in my chart, I have to feel into what is that grand cross in my life and what has that produced? Yes, I've had a shit ton of adversity and I don't have a grand cross, but some of you do. And so if you do, what has that adversity been like and what has it produced? That is the embodiment of that grand cross. You don't need an astrologer to tell you that, right? But it helps to have a context and a distinction. So when you get to that point of self-soothing, you're able to stand on your own 2 feet and to start working that muscle of balance. And I don't want to mean balance, like I'm going to say more like equipoise, where we're on a paddleboard on the waves and we're like, you know, our feet have to get strong. Believe it or not, a paddleboard looks easy, but when you get on it, it really makes your feet sore if you haven't done it, because all the bones and muscles inside your feet are totally being worked by the ocean that's moving, and you are trying to stay stable. And so the more you work that muscle, that in the metaphor of that, your stable feet, your floor on earth, then you become more and more solid. And then you can bring back readings and have them for fun as context creation. You know, someone asked me the other day, how come you get readings and you never follow them? Well, I wouldn't say never, but that I don't. And I'm like, oh, because it's fun, because I am a projector and I'm on the mountaintop looking at different ways of seeing something. So it's totally interesting. I do take it in, but I don't outsource anymore the direction of my life to someone who's talking to their guides or even my guides. I just don't. I don't even do it to my guides, because my body mind is playing the game of sovereignty. It's playing the game of being responsible. It's playing the game of choice. And I noticed that it's really easy for me to outsource to a pendulum or to even kinesiology, which I do like. I take in that information. But ultimately, I choose for myself because I choose it. That's who I want to be in the world. And that's just a choice I've made. I have very close friends who have made different choices, and it's just not my life. So I don't have opinions on that. And as long as I also see the fruits of their world, like they're people that I can see the fruits of their world and it resonates with me. So there's an alignment in that way. So let's go back to Gene Key 10. Gene Key 10 says self-obsession is a part of the path of personal growth. And you'll know when enough is enough. And when enough is enough, you get to stop and stand on your own 2 feet. And that brings you into the gift of naturalness. That's when you know who and what you are. Like, it's not a thing. It's not an identity. It's not a thing, but you can feel the pulse of life moving through you. And that is truth for you. That is naturalness for you. And one of the wake-up calls that we have in Gene Key 10, and which is why every single person has to go through it, is not only is it the spiritual awakening path, but it's also what we are seeing inside of the toxicity of like social media, for example. And again, social media is a vehicle that has, and just like virtual reality is a vehicle, which will have a higher expression and definitely a shadow expression. So you and I are connected, which is a high expression all over the world. And I'm just sitting here in Tulum and you're sitting wherever you are. That's the beauty of social media. And then there's all the shadow shit. And part of the shadow is what's called idealization. I knew someone who has a Gene Key 10 in their life work, and they were seriously extremely beautiful, model level gorgeous, and the most insecure around that level of gorgeousness. So that's so interesting, right? Like something that you and I could see as a gift, but it actually manifested as somewhat of a curse inside of that person. And that's the shadow of Gene Key 10. And we live in a culture of Gene Key 10's shadow, of selfies and filters, and the constant looking at ourselves. So let's go into narcissism. This will be fun, and this I'll end with this little tale, the mythological tale of narcissism. So the tale goes, and these are oral traditions, and they were written down by Ovid. So but that came through in an oral tradition. So there's different ways of seeing this story, but I like the story of, so narcissist was named by his mom and dad, who his mom was a fairy, a forest fairy, and his dad is a god. Oh, and so they birth this child, and this child happens to be stunningly beautiful. So his mom goes to an astrologer and says, I want to know about narcissist life. And there wasn't a thing, narcissist, the title and the clinical diagnosis came from this mythology. So it didn't mean anything that they named this child that. The child was called a narcissist. Narcissist was his name. And the astrologer said that he will live a long life, but he cannot look in a mirror. He cannot see his reflection. So they hid all the mirrors from him. Meanwhile, and he was going, as he grew up, he was going around the town and hunting inside the forest, and all the other fairy forests fell in love with him because he was stunningly beautiful. And it reminds me, I wrote someday I might unleash this, but I wrote a piece after dating a stunningly beautiful man called Why I'll Never Date a Hot Man Again. Oh my goddess, it was a revelation that I got. But so here he is, this Adonis, this beautiful Apollo-like man in the forest, and he's totally unaware of how beautiful he is, except that all these forest fairies just are like, oh my God, we love you, love you. And he's just like, ugh, stay away from me, because he doesn't get it. Meanwhile, there is a beautiful forest fairy. Her name is Echo. And Echo was, at some point, some things happened, and she was cursed by a goddess because she talked too much. And there's some other parts of it too. So the curse became that she was shut down to her own voice. I mean, this is how important mythology is. She was unable to communicate her own thoughts, and she could only say the last few words of whatever someone else uttered. Hence the name Echo came about. So her name was Echo, and she fell in love with Narcissist, and she followed him in the fairy. And there was this encounter between the two of them where he was intrigued because she was repeating his words, right? And she went up to embrace him because she thought that he had invited her to do that, and he pushed her away. He's like, get away from me. And she felt scorned and humiliated and went off. So she and her forest fairies asked Nemesis, is there a way we can make Narcissus feel this unrequited love? This love, feel love for something that he'll never get, so he can know the pain that I'm in, said Echo. And there was a way. So seemingly Nemesis lured him, but maybe not, to the lake. And when he saw his reflection in the lake, he fell in love with himself. He didn't know it was himself. And every time he would reach out to try to touch himself, what happens when you touch a pool of water, it disperses. So he was in this utter agony that he could not be with that beautiful creature. And eventually he died, starving himself, being thirsty and hungry, but never wanting to leave the side of that water, that lake, and that image of himself. Echo too, although she was immortal, she turned to like a statue or something, and only her voice, the echo of her voice, was heard. Woo! What a story. What an incredible story from mythology that then becomes what Freud then says is narcissism, extreme self-love. And then Echo is this, not a diagnostic, but this, as we know, the programming partner, the perfect fit for the narcissist is the codependent. And so in this article I was reading around from Psych Central, which is just something online, they were talking about this idealization in the narcissist. So I want to just kind of frame that a little bit. I'm not a psychologist, although I do love psychology. And also labels are intense. And the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, are like codification of mental illnesses. And we're on DSM-5, and that's been revised. And that's what psychiatrists use to diagnose and label people. And the thing about labeling is that we don't make any space for people to heal and recover. And what we know, and this is kind of the beautiful work of Dan Siegel, is that he's been able to cure so many illnesses, mental illnesses in the DSM, through these exact kind of practices, awareness practices. So narcissism has at its core, I'm looking at my notes, fantasies of perfect love, power, brilliance, beauty, success. It's idealization. It's projecting out there something that does not exist, because it will make you feel, if you could have that, somehow good enough, complete enough, lovable enough. And that's what really the stuff that we're doing on social media, and I've said this before in one of my other contexts, is like my teacher says that Atlantis killed itself through subjectification, which is that being experts, know-it-alls. And he said, our culture, if we don't make it, will be because of idealization, projecting onto the other. And so many of our love relationships are based on romantic mythology and idealization. And so we're dealing with that in the collective in the form of narcissism. Oops. And the other part is having the superiority complex. But we all know that when you have a superiority complex, what do you also have? You have an inferiority complex. You just can't touch it. You can't touch it. So then you're now projecting yourself as being bigger, better, more handsome than you really are. The need for admiration, a sense of entitlement, exploitive behaviors, a lack of empathy. Really, you have no space for others. And that's Gene Key 10. Gene Key 10 is all about the psychic space is taken up by you. There's no room for other people. And so Gene Key 10 people often have really difficult relationships. You know, somebody who I knew was dating a Gene Key 10, and they were like, it's the so-and-so show. And that's a Gene Key 10 shadow, that there's just no space, because everything is looked through the lens of how am I perceived by others? You can imagine the hell in that. I mean, we all have that shadow because we all live in that world of idealization and social media. And again, I'm not really making any of it wrong. It's just got a consequence to it. And so as awakened women, we get to choose our relationship to it, and we get to watch its consequence and effect on us. So finishing up the DSM kind of bullet points, we have arrogance, and we also have those people are generally highly jealous, and they think others are jealous of them. So that could go part and parcel with also being very good looking. You can think that other people are jealous of you. So what is that? It's constructing a world that doesn't actually exist. So you're not in relationship with the world. Like, I'm going to get in relationship with you and actually ask you, are you thinking this about me? I mean, that's kind of cool. I could just ask you, and I can now be in relationship. That's intimacy. But the narcissist cannot do that because there's such a crack inside that they can't know the truth. There was a time in my life I could not know. I didn't ask my partner if they loved me because I thought they were going to say no. It was so cracked in here. And so the narcissist it's both the narcissist and the codependent do the same thing with their cracked sense of, or do the opposite things with their cracked sense of self. One projects bigness, one projects smallness. Same. So then we go into egoism or codependency. They say it's not a disorder, it's a learned behavior. It's like where you're super self-sacrificing, like overly, like just like echo, you've lost your voice. You don't even know who you are. You are whoever someone tells you that you are, particularly the person you're in relationship. You have a deep fear of abandonment, but you have to be in relationship. You're driven to it because why? You don't know who you are if you're not in one. If you do more of your share in relationship, you also are one of those people who take responsibility for other people. So you make excuses for your partner's bad behavior, and you also think it's your fault. Oh, if I didn't do this, he wouldn't have done that. So again, there's no self. You're taking it all on you. So in a way, it's also the superior inferior matrix running, because you're superior enough to be the fulcrum of like, I'm responsible for it all, but you deeply feel cracked and broken, inferior. Interesting, right? You have a deep need for approval. You don't trust others. Again, there's the wall and the armor, and you can't make decisions because you're afraid that if you're actually you, then someone won't like it and they'll reject you. So everything you do is to not get rejected. Let's just sit with those polarities and let's find the center. So like when we are on that pendulum and that pendulum comes into the middle, let's find the middle of that wounded space, that cracked sense of self, who has a strategy. And maybe you were with a narcissistic parent, so your strategy is the echo codependent strategy. Maybe you were so traumatized and broken, your strategy is to create a fake self, and your strategy is the narcissist. So we can just come home, because Gene Key 10 is really the path of coming home, of finding your true self. And sometimes we have to go into self-obsession to let it go. So I'm going to just say the ring of humanity. I want to say the whole Gene Key structure of the ring of humanity. And I'm looking at my book. It says the 6 gene keys that encapsulate the mythic path of being a human. I love that so much, because listen to the story of narcissist and echo. It's a mythology that then the words narcissism and echo came from that story. So we are on a mythological journey. We're on the Shiro's journey, and the sacred wound is a part of that Shiro's journey. He says it's a very complex codon, that ring of humanity. It sure the hell is, isn't it? So here are the 6 gene keys that encapsulate what it means to be a human, and just see what you have in your hologenetic profile. Number 1 is we're wounded from the outset. Well, we all have this, right? But that's my unconscious life purpose. We are wounded from the outset, 25. Then we must do battle with our shadows, 38. Then we must overcome the limitations of our mind, 17. And then we surrender to the need to control life, Gene Key 21. And then we find our true self, Gene Key 10, before we can awaken, Gene Key 51. Isn't that beautiful? That's the ring of humanity. Thank you, Richard Rudd, for channeling that in so that we could really understand the unfolding of the mythology of what it means to be a person, a human, and what it means to find our true self, only to let that then dissolve to become one with all there is and experience the Siddhi of pure being, pure being. And with that, I'm going to end. If we were doing the Razor's Edge after this, you know, what we would do is we would have the conversation about narcissism. So not this coming up Sunday, but the Sunday after, January 8th, we are going to start our first Walking the Razor's Edge of 2023. That's our community call and sharing circle where we integrate these teachings. Anything can come up, practices, meditations. It's about an hour long, and we really just get in it with each other. I love that time together. We did that in November. It's free if you are part of the Evolving Sisters Network, which is just right now $22 a month as a founding member. If you are electing not to become a founding member, it's going to be also $22 just to join us for that Sunday. So we're making it super worth it for you to say yes to be inside of the network, because that is how we are creating a tight sisterhood community. This is intimacy, ladies. This is the beginning, this pathway of, you know, we've individuated. Gene Key 10 is about individuation. It's all about the self, but you know that the whole body of work of the Gene Keys isn't to leave you there. That is a lonely ass place. We need to get into the collective, and that's what the Aquarian age is about. That's what the Evolving Sisters Network is about. It's about growing in collective, because intimacy does something for you and me. It actually invents us as more than who we see ourselves. Like, it's like we get to literally see the God in us, and we only see it through the eyes of the other. It's no accident that you cannot see your own eyes unless you look in a mirror. You can only see the eyes of other. And that is the heart of why consciousness chose to break itself up into pieces that reflect you and me. And so together we weave those threads together to form that tapestry. And then we gaze on who we are collectively. That's what's happening. That's the zeitgeist of the Aquarian age. So I invite you to step into this evolutionary, revolutionary container called the Evolving Sisters Network, which gets to become more than what it is through your presence. So I love, love, love being here and being with you. Ah, and Lisa's here. Okay, also awesome. And hashtag replay for any of you just joining either on YouTube or on Facebook. And I will see you live at 9 a.m. on New Year's Day. Why not? Let's do it. You know, we're not partying the night before, so we can get up and have a Dharma talk and our soul education for awakened women. Okay, Zoe, Lisa, thanks for holding it down with me. Love you both so much, and love all you sisters. I look forward to seeing you next week. Namaste.